Minister.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to deliver the ministerial report on the dire state of the NT electrical system notified on the 21 October 2005. Madam Speaker, the report to the Assembly on the clear and immediate challenges facing Northern Territory electrical system. As the Assembly will remember, I introduced two bills during the September parliamentary sittings, which will be debated this month. These bills aim to bring about major reform and a full overhaul of the electricity system and the market. The Assembly may also recall that my ministerial statement from March 2025 sittings warned that our electrical system is in immediate danger and requires urgent, decisive action. Well, Madam Speaker, our first step to deliver affordable, reliable, secure energy to the Territorians was to scrap Labor's ideological and financially crippling 50% renewable target by 2030, Madam Speaker, a target that the own Labor government knew wasn't achievable. In fact, Madam Speaker, there's a report that was made available through Freedom of Information which was redacted. Every page, Madam Speaker, except the front page and the back page. And Madam Speaker, that report showed that Labor weren't going to meet their target, and in fact that report showed that the target was financially crippling and unachievable, Madam Speaker, and the previous Labor government knew that. They were given expert evidence which told them that, and they choose to ignore it, and the evidence is clear, Madam Speaker. They redacted every page of that report when it was released under Freedom of Information. It wasn't released voluntarily, Madam Speaker. It was released because they had to. Madam Speaker, instead our government's energy policy is focused on giving Territorians reliable and secure energy at the lowest cost. Madam Speaker, I'll say that again because it's super important. Our government's energy policy is focused on giving Territorians reliable and secure energy at the lowest cost. Madam Speaker, our second step was to fast-track and facilitate the development of the Beetaloo through swift approval processes, legislative reform and providing certainty to industry and investors. Madam Speaker, and the Beetaloo speaks for itself. Madam Speaker, in fact, right now, as we speak, there's pipeline being put into the ground which is going to connect Tamboran resources to the Armidale's pipeline, some 37-kilometre pipeline, which is going to inject millions and millions of dollars into our economy and, Madam Speaker, provide a pathway for those gas molecules in the Beetaloo to be able to deliver to our generators at Channel Point, Madam Speaker. We know that the previous Labor government failed to build on the infrastructure and there is a gas shortage, a shortfall, just to bring the lights on here in the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker. In fact, Madam Speaker, we're in such a state where we had to buy gas from Impex at spot prices, which is extremely expensive, Madam Speaker. It just shows another example how the previous Labor government failed to invest in the energy market, failed to invest in the gas, and, Madam Speaker, unfortunately, Territorian bore the brunt of it, Madam Speaker. They're the ones paying through the roof for the power prices. They're the ones who have to live here and deal with the energy shortfalls that this previous Labor government brought upon them. Madam Speaker, our third step was to introduce these bills, which I spoke about earlier, which will make it possible to invest quickly, strategically and holistically to protect our electricity system. Put simply, these bills are essential to keep our electricity network reliable and secure and to keep energy bills as affordable as possible for all Territorians. Without taking urgent action, powering our homes, businesses, hospitals and schools will become more and more challenging in years to come, Madam Speaker, unless, of course, we take swift action. We know, Madam Speaker, that if we left the system how it was a risk to the vulnerable Territorians, Madam Speaker. We know there's lots of people right across the Territory who rely upon air conditioning, rely upon energy to keep vital medical equipment running in their own homes, not to mention the hospital, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, this simply put lives at risk. Simply put lives at risk, Madam Speaker, where the previous Labor government failed to invest. We have acted swiftly, and Territorians can look forward to regulatory unless we acted swiftly, Madam Speaker, Territorians could look forward to our regular scheduled brownouts and load shedding like in 1970s in Britain or modern-day South Africa. But Madam Speaker, we're not in Britain, we're not in modern-day South Africa, we're here in the Northern Territory, and we need to make sure that we invest. All of us in the Darwin-Katherine region remember the widespread blackouts we experienced last month during Resources Week of all times, Madam Speaker. And we also know that Palmerston experienced blackouts just this week, Madam Speaker. Unless we act now, such occurrences will become a fact of life in the Northern Territory, which is not the unique lifestyle that we want to be known for, Madam Speaker. We want to be known for a place where energy is abundant, affordable and cheap. Madam Speaker, if we have cheap energy, we can attract manufacturing here, Madam Speaker. We know that we've got a lot of land, and Madam Speaker, we are very close to our Asian friends, and I know the Minister for Asian Relations Trade has been over developing those relationships, Madam Speaker, to be able to better put the Northern Territory or Darwin in a position to be able to export to those people. We know there's literally billions of people just to the north of us, Madam Speaker, and I know the Minister has done a mountain of work to be able to build those relationships so they can come into Darwin and we can export what we've got to our northern friends. Madam Speaker, how are we to give confidence to Territorians and restore our lifestyle if we cannot maintain reliable, cheap power supply? How are we meant to attract private investment and population growth that we need to rebuild our economy if we cannot guarantee affordable, abundant and secure energy supply? Madam Speaker, the answer is simply we cannot. And the gravity of the situation has driven our government and the public service to act quickly. Instead of acting fast for Territorians, the previous Labor government got stuck in endless debate, delay and ignored critical electricity infrastructure. I remind the Assembly that in 18 months, the opposition leader... I remind the Assembly that the 18 months the opposition leader was the Minister for Essential Services and Renewables, that Tennant Creek, our most stable grid, lost power on 5 separate occasions, yet she did nothing. Shame. Did nothing, Madam Speaker, to Territorians. Shame. The Utilities Commission, our independent electricity regulator, has been warning for years that the Northern Territory must act or risk our electricity networks for blackouts. For example, Madam Speaker, the Commission has flagged reliability challenges and investment decisions required since their first report in 2018-2019, the NT Electricity Outlook Report. In their 2024 the NT Electricity Output Report, the Commission stated that the Territory electricity supply has reached a critical juncture. They also stated that significant investment is unavoidable in addressing current and emerging power system issues. NT households experience more than double the number of blackouts compared to the rest of Australia. In 23-24, the average NT household experienced 2.6 outages per year compared to 1.1 outages nationally, Madam Speaker. Territory network performance continues to decline relative to the national average due to years of underinvestment. The previous Labor government was told to urgently push reforms on the electricity system and market to handle these challenges. But Labor started this work in 2020, and by the time they lost office in 2024, they had made no progress on these urgent reforms. Madam Speaker, they commissioned 2 external reviews and reports, but they didn't act on them. They didn't make the necessary decisions to safeguard our electricity system. Madam Speaker, our government has evaluated these reports, which is a governance review of the Northern Territory Power System Controller and Market Operator Report in 2021, and the Northern Territory Electricity Market Gateway Review in 2022. Madam Speaker, and I've read both these reports, Madam Speaker. They clearly state that something needed to be done. So for at least 4 years, Madam Speaker, the information was before the Cabinet of the previous Labor government, and they chose to do nothing about it, Madam Speaker. They ignored the reports and said, let's put it under the carpet and let's forget about it because that's how we'll deal with it. We won't deal with it. We'll just forget about it and hope it goes away. Well, Madam Speaker, those reports very clearly state that you can't just forget about this. You cannot just put it under the carpet and hope it goes away, Madam Speaker, because it put lives at risk. If the power goes out, Madam Speaker, and vulnerable people, right now, Madam Speaker, there's heat wave conditions across the Northern Territory. Vulnerable Territorians are relying upon air conditioning on medical equipment at home, hospitals, education, the police. If that system breaks down, Madam Speaker, and goes out for a significant period of time, Madam Speaker, and you might argue what is the definition of significant period of time, Madam Speaker, even if it's only a couple of hours, people's fridges start going off. If it's a day, Madam Speaker, the food in the fridges goes off. Medical condition, operations of equipment fails, Madam Speaker. Battery backup systems start to fail. Madam Speaker, when we came into office, the Treasurer requested a further expert advice from the NT Utilities Commission on the best way to progress. And their advice was crystal clear. Make a decision and get on with the reform. The decision is there. The recommendations are there for a number of years. Madam Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition knows this because she was the Minister. She would have read those reports, Madam Speaker, but for some reason she chose to ignore Territorians, ignore our vulnerable Territorians and let the system fail. So that is what we're doing, Madam Speaker. As part of our year of action, certainty and security, we are getting on with the job. Decisive action and not delaying is what separates our government from those opposite, Madam Speaker. Like I said, Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister for Essential Services and Renewables during the previous government, so she is responsible for this Labor's inaction. As a result, Territorians have faced big problems with reliabilities, high costs, missed opportunities because of 4 years Labor did nothing. Labor never considered the whole of system costs or implications of their decisions in relation to the NT electricity network. All they cared about was getting as much solar connected to the grid as possible to meet their target without the thought to stability and reliability problems that caused, Madam Speaker. Again, it goes back to their failed policy, which their own report said was unachievable and was super expensive, which they redacted, Madam Speaker. That shows there was a conscience of guilt. They knew what that report had said. They had read it, and yet they redacted everything except the front page and the last page. Madam Speaker, because of their inaction, the utility farms and Mountain Dam bachelor, Catherine, gathered dust since 2021, only be allowed to dispatch electricity under our government in the last year. Solar rooftops and big solar farms are being limited or curtailed, often because our networks are getting weaker and less stable. There's no point, Madam Speaker, trying to add more solar into the network on an ad hoc basis if the grid instability means that we can't use the solar we already have. The member for 𝒊𝒄𝒊𝒄𝒊 may understand this better if she had bothered to turn up at the legislative briefing that was offered in relation to this legislation. Clearly, Madam Speaker, she didn't care because she didn't even bother to show up. In addition, Labor's hands-off approach to maintaining our vital infrastructure has meant that government-owned organisations and corporations have no choice to take matters in their own hands. There appears to have been no strategic vision or whole-of-system planning undertaken, as the Utility Commission has repeatedly called for. Madam Speaker, this has resulted in the NT3 government-owned organisations, Territory Generation as the main electricity generator, Power and Water Corporation as the system provider and operator, including system control, Jacana Energy as the electricity retailer, having to pursue their own procurement and contracting services and activities on an ad hoc basis, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's examples where two of those organisations were going to buy condensers, Madam Speaker. We only really needed one in our system, but because there wasn't any of the whole of system approach, the previous Labor government, were going to waste at least $20 million, and that's a very conservative estimate of what a single condenser would cost, Madam Speaker. They were going to buy two of them, and one would have sat in the shed. One would have sat in the shed because this previous Labor government failed to look at the system in its big picture. Madam Speaker, but don't just take our government's word for it. Instead, let's hear from the independent electricity regulator. Again, Utilities Commission stated in their 2018-19 report, leaving the Territory Generation alone to do the work and propose a solution to government risks, a potential suboptimal decision from a whole of system perspective that consumers and taxpayers would pay for over many decades. So, Madam Speaker, that's an independent person, Utilities Commission, saying that letting these government organisations do it by themselves will lead to a poor decision which taxpayers will pay for over many years. Madam Speaker, and an example is of one small example is a condenser. They were going to buy two, we'd only needed one, at least $20 million, perhaps more, Madam Speaker, depending what you want to buy, and I think a top-of-the-shelf one could be up to $60 to $80 million. So I'm being very conservative, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's clearly black and white Labor, by doing nothing, pass the cost and the tax burden on to hard-working Territorians. The mums and dads out there, Madam Speaker, working hard during the day, send the kids off to school, come home, do the stuff around home, do the chores you do at home, put the kids to bed, do the tax invoices, and then they repeat that cycle. The mums and dads, Madam Speaker, who are working hard, and their tax money, remember, Madam Speaker, this is not Labor's money, this is Territorians' hard-earned tax money that the previous Labor government wasted. Madam Speaker, I can go back to my favourite, the $5,000 for a Christmas tree. $5,000 for a Christmas tree, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, we know there's a whole list of blowouts that this previous Labor government failed to mention and failed to take care, because they didn't care, Madam Speaker. They just spent money as if it was a money tree, Madam Speaker. And let me tell you, Madam Speaker, I've been in private enterprise. There is no such thing as a money tree. You've got to work for it, and you've got to do the work, Madam Speaker. And the previous Labor government failed to do that. We know that there was the $35 million payout they were going to pay to the youth offenders, and they tried to hide it. They tried to make sure that they instructed their solicitors to make sure that there was a confidentiality clause so the court couldn't, that figure couldn't be released. So they knew, Madam Speaker, what they were doing was wrong, and they tried to hide it. No, Madam Speaker, no more. That's why our whole of government has expedited these market electricity reforms, and that's why these two bills will be debated in sittings this week. We will not repeat the mistakes of the previous government, and the timing, Madam Speaker, cannot be more critical. Madam Speaker, in Alice Springs, the Ron Gooden power station is at the end of its productive life, meaning that Alice Springs grid reliability challenges will worsen in the near term. In the Darwin-Katherine, everyone remember last month's blackout, a timely reminder of how fragile our system is. If our government had not acted to finalise the commissioning of the Darwin-Katherine battery energy storage system earlier this year, those blackouts may have lasted longer, Madam Speaker. Without the backup devices, our blackouts could be easy 12 hours, Madam Speaker, trying to get these generators up and running back on time. According to the last Utilities Commission Power System Performance Review, the Katherine residents endured over 8 hours without power spread across multiple outages in 23-24. 8 hours, Madam Speaker. Alice Springs and Katherine especially are extremely vulnerable to blackouts going forward as our equipment ages and our hardware deteriorates. So, how can we fix it, Madam Speaker? Firstly, our government is taking upon it to the office of the Energy Sub-Cabinet Committee, chaired by myself, which focuses on NT energy issues. Our government has instructed the government organisations that all business cases for investment must be endorsed by the Sub-Cabinet Committee prior to the Treasury approving it. Madam Speaker, this is about making sure we don't waste taxpayers' money. This stops that uncoordinated buying of equipment and investments that may negatively impact on the bottom line, Madam Speaker. Secondly, our government is in the final stages of preparing a regulated electricity system investment plan, a RECIP, which is designed to assess the current liability, devise a whole system approach to address those issues identified earlier, and also to identify when and where and how much assets need to what do we need to buy, Madam Speaker? Do we need to buy new generators? Do we need to buy more batteries? Do we need to have more solar? To get that whole system approach, Madam Speaker, to make sure that our energy system is reliable. Madam Speaker, and also one of the most important factors is to make sure that the cost is at the lowest to consumers. We need to make sure, Madam Speaker, that our energy system is reliable and the cost is as low as possible to our Territorians. Madam Speaker, because they're the ones who pay the bill. Madam Speaker, we've brought through the electricity market reform bills which will be debated this sittings. With these bills will be allowed to put the system control out by itself and also have the system control implement our RECIP, our plan to make sure we keep those costs down, Madam Speaker. Our government prides itself on accountability and honouring our commitments to Territorians and putting downward pressure on the cost because that's what we want to do, Madam Speaker. We want to make sure we don't waste taxpayers' money. For example, $5,000 for a Christmas tree, Madam Speaker, that the previous government does. Madam Speaker, we know that the community service obligation is going up and up and up. This is an underhanded way, Madam Speaker, that the previous Labor government hid the cost, the real costs and the real challenges of the electricity system. Madam Speaker, that system, community service obligation is paid for by taxpayers' money, Madam Speaker. $51 million year-on-year increase. Taxpayers' money, Madam Speaker. Going out the door is they don't care, Madam Speaker, because they genuinely thought that it's not their money, let's just spend it. But, Madam Speaker, let me tell you, it is Territorians' money and it needs to be spent wisely. Thank you.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I think bringing this report by the CLP Minister shows just how thin their legislative agenda is. Debating legislation that goes to the heart of what the member for Nelson has brought before the House today shows an absolute move of desperation in trying to fill a 2-hour gap because they don't have legislation to actually debate for us as members of Parliament to do our job and create laws and better laws for the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, but they just don't have the gumption to be able to do such hard work. And the Minister's gloom and doom warnings about the electricity system, Madam Speaker, is to cause alarm to everyday Territorians because they don't want to do the hard work. And guess what? The last time the CLP were in government, Madam Speaker, they slapped Territorians with a 30 for those without the clean ears over there, 30% increase to power for Territorians. So they are absolutely priming that type of increase. No doubt in our minds, Madam Speaker, and the Labor opposition, that is exactly what the CLP is getting ready to do again to Territorians, is to slap them with a huge increase, a 1/3 power increase. So get ready, Territorians, for that, because this is the priming. I've seen it before, and then you'll get slapped with that 30% increase when people are already struggling with the cost of living, Madam Speaker. And there is so much heat and noise from the member for Nelson, Madam Speaker, that we're starting to wonder if he's generating his own source of energy with all that hot air over there. Maybe he could capture some of that hot air and turn it into some energy for Territorians without wasting our time at the Northern Territory Parliament, who is about lawmaking, Madam Speaker. So firstly, let's get some facts straight. This reform work, Madam Speaker, on the electricity systems has been well underway for many years now, and the fact that the member for Nelson comes in here and rattles and bumbles along some ridiculous mistruths that he didn't even sound like he believed when he spoke them, Madam Speaker, himself. He's not even convincing himself that those words are true, but yet here he is in the chamber to waste our time today to try and convince Territorians that no work was ever done around the electricity systems of the Northern Territory before the CLP came to government in August. Well, they've definitely dropped the ball, Madam Speaker, because a lot of that work, and I would love the backbenchers to go and do some homework instead of being fed the mistruths from their cabinet, go away and do the homework, because the work was done and primed and ready for 2024. Obviously, a change of government changes things, it can slow things down, but not a whole year, Madam Speaker. 12 months lost. So there's the member for Nelson rattling on about how much time has been wasted. A whole year.
Take your seat, please, Opposition Leader. What's your point of order, member for Gwoja?
Standing Order 20, Madam Speaker. We haven't even been in for 30 minutes yet today, and the interjections are overshadowing the Leader of the Opposition's deputation to the Assembly.
Yes, they are, and I will note that the Deputy Chief Minister was heard in silence, and I think, in all respect to the Opposition Leader, she deserves the same. So please continue in silence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The work to diversify the Northern Territory's energy supply has been well underway, with a mix of gas and, oh my gosh, get ready for this word, CLP, renewables. Yes, we have planned for renewables, a word that for some reason the Deputy Chief Minister, who is responsible for this portfolio, is shamed to say, like it's a dirty word. All the work that's happened over the last couple of years, the things that Territorians expect their government to be working on when it comes to reliable energy sources, renewables is part of the mix, Madam Speaker. So dare I say it out loud, renewables, which the legislation tomorrow is all about enabling renewables, but you won't hear that word from the member for Nelson. It's like he's scared of it, he's going to catch a cold or something. Well, a very thought-out plan, Madam Speaker, over many years has now had a 1-year delay thanks to the CLP sitting on their laurels, but let's keep moving on, Madam Speaker, because we know that them dragging the change train puts us back Madam Speaker, when we talk about the territory electricity market and the overview that was published in a paper. Oh, there we go. I've got a copy here, Madam Speaker, for the Parliament, because I've saved the homework for the backbenchers and the other ministers who think that no work has been done or believe the rubbish that was said by the member for Nelson. It is the electricity market overview paper, Madam Speaker, and guess what the date is? February 2024. And very interestingly, Madam Speaker, on the page 9 of 9, and I will table this for the Parliament to read and hopefully get across, more particularly the CLP, since they think no work has been done and it's magically started since you came to government. Oh, the legislation passage due for Q4 of 2024. So that's the end of last year. That's when the CLP came to government. The work should have been done then. So we are well indeed a year overdue, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I seek Labor to table this document so the CLP don't have to go away and do the hard work. It's been done for them. It's at their fingertips.
The question is leave granted for the tabling of the document? All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no.
Very enthusiastic because I know they've been caught out, Madam Speaker, but let's make sure that people know, for the record, that work has definitely been done. So do not believe the rubbish of the Deputy Chief Minister. You'd think that he'd actually do his work, but to be able to make something like this political is ridiculous. Thank you. Madam Speaker, in fact, according to the timeline, the reform works, you can have a look at it yourself, backbenchers calling out over the side there, the legislation has been definitely dropped by your CLP government. It was due to be debated a year ago, a year behind. That's how slow you mob are in thinking about energy and the Northern Territory network. But it will happen tomorrow, apparently, so God save us all. Thank you, CLP, for being a year behind everybody else. These laws should be in place a year ago, Madam Speaker, absolutely. So we will be debating that tomorrow. So in fact, Madam Speaker, this work around the Northern Territory electricity system and market operator should have been done. If you needed to do your actual work, maybe for the end of last year, still figuring out what to do in government like you are now, should have been done at least at the beginning of this year, Madam Speaker. That would have given them several months, some reading time over Christmas, New Year, to get it done at the beginning of the year. But no, they've rested on their laurels, they've wasted time, and we're waiting until October to see this, a year and 2 months on from becoming government. Madam Speaker, the Regulated Electricity System Investment Plan should have been underway at the start of this year. So this is why those decisions that you make as government are important, because they push things back, they delay, and they cause stress on the system because you're not doing your job as government. So shame on you, CLP. This timeline was well underway under our former government, and it's exactly what the CLP has been doing for the last year, Madam Speaker. I have no clue, and I'll never try and answer for them. That's something Territorians can ask of them. Nothing from the member for Nelson in explaining why he, as the responsible minister, has wasted 14 months. Nothing, because they don't take responsibility. They like being in government, they like having the titles, they like going off and doing their excursions and exercises across the territory, but they don't like holding themselves to account. They don't like saying that they have the responsibility. It's either the blame of 8 years before with Labor, or now the new narrative we've noticed, and they've got a new media person, so maybe this is where it's coming from. Oh, let's start calling on the federal government to talk about the jobs and the work that we should be doing as the Northern Territory government. Constantly for the last few weeks, that's what we're hearing. So there's no accountability. There is no responsibility when it comes to being in government when you're the CLP, Madam Speaker. They like deflecting, they like blaming, they don't like actually doing the work or saying that they're doing the work, Madam Speaker. It's very clear that the CLP are trying to inoculate themselves from criticism should there be blackouts over the wet season, and unfortunately it's an unfortunate thing that happens in the Territory with our extreme weather events here in the Territory, whether you're in the top end or whether you're in the desert and central Australian area. They're desperate to finger point to someone else. So I'm sure, Madam Speaker, if you experience a blackout in Alice Springs, it's going to be Labor's fault this Christmas. I'm sure if a cyclone comes and rips through Darwin, it's going to be Labor's fault that the weather changed, Madam Speaker. We will be ready for the blame, but what we'll be pointing the finger is what are you doing to act and support Territorians when it comes to the stability of the network, Madam Speaker? That wasn't already in train. Deeply, deeply cynical politics, and the CLP is trying to play Territorians for a fool. Madam Speaker, let's look at that track record for energy so far by the CLP. Their solar battery grants Well, they dished out a few at the start of their term, quickly put a stop to them though, might I add, a cynical election stunt, Madam Speaker, and only a handful of Territorians benefit, and offered very little in the way of meaningful expansion when it comes to solar energy and private residents, Madam Speaker. And their big election pitch to double solar tariffs was a complete debacle and joke. They said it would be for peak times, and Madam Speaker, it was not. We saw that in black and white, but wait, that was after the election. After they promised Territorians they would do it, they changed the goalposts. They lied to Territorians when it came to the solar feed-in tariff times, Madam Speaker. They said the hours would be through those peak times, and they changed them to a very reduced late time. Ridiculous when we're talking about some Territorians losing their faith that the very reason that they had voted for the CLP may have been this one issue. So how do you explain that to those Territorians? They still haven't, Madam Speaker, because they don't show any accountability. They're cowards. They scrapped the renewables target and completely told furphies to Territorians and misled those reasons for why, Madam Speaker. It would cost billions of dollars, they said. It's been proven to be utterly false, Madam Speaker, and they've never come out and apologised because they don't agree with if you do something wrong that you should apologise for doing that. If you tell Territorians one thing and you go and do another, you should explain yourself and you should apologise for that, Madam Speaker. But no, there is no accountability, no responsibility when it comes to the CLP. In fact, actually not a single setting in this particular area of policy when we're talking about the reform work that people expect a government should do and not make it political. But they have, Madam Speaker. They managed to make a really important issue that should just be government's job and duty. They've made it political, and it's ridiculous. And they don't want to say renewables. We know that, Madam Speaker. When it comes to the energy mix of this government, we wonder what the word is that they've been told that they need to change and find another alternative word. But they have scrapped those power tariffs, Madam Speaker, and those subsidies for schools. One of the biggest kick in the guts. And here we are yesterday with another filler of time with the Education Minister's report. Dare I say she didn't mention that the CSOs for the community service obligations for schools have changed under her watch, under her team's watch. They are making schools pay a ridiculous amount of money for their power, Madam Speaker, and did it quietly in the background. Didn't put a media release out of that, didn't go and do a video or a little selfie photo around Parliament about that. Did the Minister for Education, Madam Speaker? Absolutely not, because they know the significant hike prices for schools has been detrimental. One school, Madam Speaker, and I have another document to table for the Parliament, on the 16th of August this year, the NT Council of Government Schools Organisation, or NT COGSO, put out a media release of showing and stating the headline, Madam Speaker, 636% power increase in 1 month, students' funds diverted to pay electricity costs. And, Madam Speaker, this has been put out by the President of the NT COGSO, and the example that is clearly here in black and white was one school has reported that they had seen a 636% increase to their power costs because of the decision by the CLP to make schools pay quietly in the background, making this big decision for schools that have impacted on their bottom line, on those budgets, the resources, the schools, the $1 billion schools deal that was made in the Northern Territories for the school resources so we can support our kids, and they are making schools now pay the bills because they're too lazy to go out and do the work themselves. Shameful, absolutely shameful. Say one thing and do another. Quietly do something and then fade off into the background, Madam Speaker. That's the CLP way of doing business. Territorians better strap in, because that's what we're going to expect for the next 3.5 years, or 2 years and 10 months if you're counting down, Madam Speaker. So I will seek leave to table the NT COGSO media release, Madam Speaker.
Is leave granted? Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Local government councils have to grapple with much higher power prices next year because their subsidies have been taken away as well. And is this going to mean either services are cut or the rates hike up for Territorians? Again, silence from the CLP and any explanation, Madam Speaker, about why and how these changes will impact not just on individuals and families, but other tiers of government and organisations, as I've outlined, Madam Speaker. And for big families who do use a lot of power, Madam Speaker, like running heat in Central Australia when it's winter time, those who are living on rural blocks with bore pumps are also being hit with those bigger power bills. But no, sorry, or by the way, guys, this is what's happening and this is why we've got to do it from the CLP. No, they make decisions and they don't explain them, and then they hide away when they are asked questions, Madam Speaker. And we know that the CLP is either incredibly lazy or incompetent, I think both, that a much needed electricity reforms that are now a year behind where they should have been are suddenly sprung up and been discovered as an important thing by the CLP. I hope the rest of the CLP government members are asking their minister why he wasted 14 months, Madam Speaker. I really do hope in the background in your caucus or in your conversations that you're asking why your Deputy Chief Minister is lazy and incompetent and can't even get some electricity reform when all the work had been done already, Madam Speaker. I really hope they're standing up for Territorians and their electorates, because we know they don't care about ours, but I hope they care about their own. Madam Speaker, all of this heat and noise from the minister begs another question. If they've upped power prices for schools, if they've upped power prices for local government councils, if they have upped prices for large families and those on rural blocks, who's next? Well, guess what, Madam Speaker? It's my gut feeling it's going to be the rest of us. So the settings now to push up power prices, to prime, to get ready, to say we were talking about this a year ago and look what's happened, now we have to put up the prices. I am very, very sure that this is what is going to happen, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the CLP and their resolve around energy for Territorians. This is a genuine concern, and I urge all constituents from all electorates to be writing to the government, asking them what their intentions are to rule out power prices at or above CIP for Territorians. And we didn't hear a single word from the minister today on that, so he's got another chance tomorrow, Madam Speaker, to speak in the legislation. So let's hear that line from him and the spin makers upstairs, so we'll find out the truth once and for all. Madam Speaker, when we talk about the comparison and the contrast, when Labor was in government, there was a very strong plan for renewables and gas to ensure the diversification for our energy supply. There was a set renewables target of 50% by 2030, and there was a very thought out and detailed roadmap to get there. Some of the smartest people in the Northern Territory government, Madam Speaker, were working on this plan. So thankfully, because of that good and thorough work, it's one thing the CLP can't rubbish, because those people worked extremely hard to look at what was happening not just around the rest of the country, but also around the rest of the world, to make sure the Northern Territory's plan was not just fit for purpose for our context, our climate, and our very large geographic coverage but small population. They did a huge amount of work and it was all just thrown away in the bin by the CLP. So I do say that it's a huge disappointment, not just for those very clever and particularly energy experts in the field across the departments and the three GOCs, but it's also very disappointing for Territorians who want to see that diversification, but the steady and reliable energy sources that need to be maintained in the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, the former Labor government signed 3 energy security agreements for alternative energy supplies after issues with black tip to ensure certainty of supply. Tambourine deal with supply competitively priced gas to Territory power generators for 9 years from 2026. Central Petroleum from the Mereenie and Palm Valley gas fields will secure local gas supplies over a 6-year period. And Empire Energy first gas will go to Territorians, providing us with competitive priced gas until 2030. So, Madam Speaker, that work has been in train, so don't let the CLP tell anyone that suddenly, because they're in government, that it popped up out of nowhere. There is continued work that we did in government around subsidising electricity for households and territory businesses to ensure that electricity uniform tariff and the community service obligation, or CSO, most people will say, that it was going to be remaining in place and that it would not hit Territorians' hip pocket, Madam Speaker. And all of this is slowly being stripped away by the CLP. There is a huge danger here, Madam Speaker, that the CLP government, who has a lazy and incompetent minister, makes up hot air, tries to blow up the work, and then does nothing to show that the CLP is serious about the stability of energy. So we can hear all the headline quotes and lines that sound good for a 1-second grab on the radio or the news, Madam Speaker, or in the newspaper. But what we want to see is the real work being done, and we want to see the CLP government being true to their word and telling Territorians when and if there's going to be a power hike.
Member for Goyder.
Madam Speaker, I don't know what side of the bed the Leader of the Opposition woke up this morning. Some days she gets up in this place and says the CLP government are rushing through and doing too much legislation, and then days like today we're hearing that we're not doing enough legislation quick enough for them. But Madam Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition, perhaps they don't think our power grid is important, but I do. And Madam Speaker, they talked about, the Leader of the Opposition talked about, it's been 14 months since the CLP government came to government, and that we haven't done enough in those 14 months. Well, Madam Speaker, they had 8 years. 8 years. Now, I am actually a mathematician, but 8 years is actually a lot more than 14 months, but it is what it is. And Madam Speaker, when you can't play the game, they try to play the person instead. Instead of talking about what Territorians care about, they talk about attacking the Deputy Chief Minister. They keep saying things like, it's not about politics, it's not about politics, we've got to make it not about politics, and then go political attack after political attack. It's very inconsistent. Shame on them. I'm personally looking forward to the member for Gwoja's contribution in this debate, as I'm sure he'll display some real leadership when it's his turn to speak. Now, Madam Speaker, let's talk about electricity. I love electricity. I love seeing power lines, Madam Speaker. They remind me, Madam Speaker, and Darryl Carrigan in the castle, of man's ability to generate power. I love seeing Christmas lights on gates and fences in the rural area, and Madam Speaker, above all, I love aircon. Not quite as much as my fiancée, who insists on keeping the aircon cold enough to give me the shakes, Madam Speaker, but we love our aircon. And Madam Speaker, without power, without gas and without electricity and a stable grid, we don't get aircon. And Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory households experience more than double the number of blackouts compared to the rest of Australia. And I'd like to thank the hard-working power and water staff and emergency repairs that go on when there is a blackout, and they often brave intense weather conditions and storms and get out late at night to make sure they can turn on power as quick as possible. So a big shout out to all the hard-working people at Power and Water and across the Territory who make sure our power gets turned on promptly. But whenever there is a power outage, there'll be a post within the Humpty Doo community Facebook group, a great community resource, and within minutes of the blackout, day or night, doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m, 3 a.m, or in the midday, 100 Facebook comments will give you a street-by-street review of where the power is out. You'll know exactly what areas are affected. And many rural residents, I do concede, are self-sufficient and have invested in solar batteries and generators, and that when a blackout does occur, they flick a switch and they're sorted for a while. However, for many residents, the impact of losing power is tremendous. For those on bores in the rural area, no power means no water. No power means no aircons. No power means no ceiling fans or cold drinks. And no power, Madam Speaker, means fish tank pumps fail and tragedies occur. Now, Madam Speaker, I personally have lost an angelfish to a blackout that occurred under the failed Labor government. It was a horrible thing to have to come home to. And extended blackouts mean food rots, families shower in the pool or send their kids to school without clean clothes, black and brownouts trip and break appliances, costing families thousands in replacements without notice for key appliances such as fridge, freezers, aircons and pool pumps. And Madam Speaker, we inherited a system that simply wasn't up to scratch. This CLP government, in our year of action, certainty and security, is getting on with the job and acting. We will not follow in the footsteps of the failed opposition. We will not ignore requests for reform and investment for years like they did. in indecision. We will not commission reports telling us what to do and then promptly ignore them like Labor did and fail to act in time. Madam Speaker, they promised the world and delivered nothing. We're promising reform and we will deliver. Now, Madam Speaker, this reform isn't sexy. This reform isn't eye-catching. But Madam Speaker, this reform is necessary. This investment is necessary. And this country Liberal Party government will deliver for Territorians. Thank you.
Member for Namatjira, Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on this ministerial report on our electricity system, and I speak about a future that is not yet written, Madam Speaker, but will be, by the decisions we make right here today. The Northern Territory's electricity sector stands at a crossroads, and if we fail to act, we face not only rising costs, but the real risk of a system failure, prolonged blackouts, stranded infrastructure and deepening financial burdens for future generations. And Madam Speaker, this is a moment for reform, and Labor seem not to understand this. And let's begin with the reality of where we are headed without intervention. Across the Territory, the electricity system is absorbing wave after wave of structural pressure. We're seeing escalating generation costs driven by rising gas prices and an ageing asset base. A ballooning community service obligation projected to reach $192 million in 25-26, up $51 million in 1 year. And why is this so, Madam Speaker? Because Labor failed to plan for the future. We have unstable grid conditions with increasing solar penetration, stressing legacy infrastructure. And we have opportunities that exist for improvement of governance, where our three government-owned corporations could operate more efficiently to reduce duplication in decisions, which then improves efficiency and reduces costs. And Madam Speaker, these pressures are compounding. They're not isolated. Every year we delay coordinated reform, the risk profile of our electricity system deepens, and so does our fiscal exposure. And this is not just a technical challenge, Madam Speaker, it's a Treasury challenge. The cost of holding the status quo is mounting in subsidies, in lost productivity and growing vulnerability. And Madam Speaker, how did we get here? Well, we had a Labor government that failed to take action. They were pursuing unrealistic targets, knowing that they couldn't get there, and they were throwing money at renewables. And Madam Speaker, we are not anti-renewables. We're going to consider renewables within our grid because we know it is the right thing to do. But we're not going to do it at any cost, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, if we continue with a fragmented and reactive approach, the Northern Territory faces multiple long-term risks. We have reliability risks as our ageing gas generation fleet is not getting any younger, of course. Channel Island, a backbone of supply, requires direct investment to maintain operational life. And without new investment, power outages will become more frequent and severe, particularly in Alice Springs and Tennant Creek. The financial risk of the rising CSO is crowding out other government investment. At this rate, we are locking in unsustainable expenditure just to maintain a fragile status quo. And this is before factoring in emergency generation, network failures or escalating fuel costs. Our investor confidence is at risk. Without clear centralised planning, developers and financiers face delays and uncertainty. Projects like the Bachelor Solar Farm have suffered due to opaque connection processes from the previous Labor government. If we cannot offer certainty, Madam Speaker, the NT will lose investment to other jurisdictions. And we have system integrity risk. With the decentralised rooftop utility scale solar, it is increasing grid instability. And without a system-wide operator, we risk asset duplication, stranded investments and system blackouts, all at public expense, Madam Speaker. And that's why we are doing this work, to make sure that we have stability in our grid going forward. But why must we do this reform, Madam Speaker? Well, it's obvious that the time has come for a coordinated, risk-mitigated and forward-looking approach. This is exactly what we are delivering through the electricity market reform legislation that was introduced in September 2025. The establishment of NTESMO, the Northern Territory Electrical System and Market Operator, as an independent statutory authority marks a critical turning point and juncture in our electricity market. Madam Speaker, NTESMO will provide whole-of-system planning, a 10-year regulated electricity system investment plan, or more commonly known as the RESIP, central oversight of generation, procurement and asset optimisation, and a risk-informed recommendation base to minimise future exposure rather than just managing today's problems. Madam Speaker, this is about getting ahead of the curve, identifying future pinch points and designing a system that avoids them entirely, something that the previous Labor government failed to do. And the public procurement model is not just about modernising how we buy electricity. It's about embedding financial discipline and system resilience at the heart of our energy sector. And it ensures that all new generation investments are coordinated, minimising redundancy. Procurement is undertaken at least cost, maximising the Territory's buying power. Contracts are structured to mitigate financial risk during high demand or failure scenarios. And the role of TGen is maintained where appropriate to preserve reliability, particularly in our smaller grids. And most importantly, the Treasurer, as the shareholding minister, will approve all major investments, ensuring that they are aligned with Treasury's risk appetite and broader fiscal strategy. And to implement and put these safeguards in, the change must be managed carefully, and Madam Speaker, it will be. We are implementing reform in phases through to mid-2027, ensuring operational continuity and minimising disruption to workers, communities and businesses. Existing long-term contracts will be transitioned under a no worse off principle, and ongoing engagement through the Electricity Reform Task Force ensures that risks are identified early and mitigated collaboratively with proponents. And by legally separating the NTESMO from Power and Water, we are establishing the governance independence necessary to ensure long-term system integrity, without duplicating functions or increasing costs to Territorians, Madam Speaker. The opposition leader spoke about increasing costs, and yes, there are costs increasing to large users, but Madam Speaker, we are on the front foot making sure that those costs don't increase to everyday residential users. But Madam Speaker, let's talk about the cost of inaction. And let me be absolutely clear. Inaction is the most expensive option on the table. It will cost us more in subsidies, it will cost us in lost investment, and it will cost us in reputational damage. And it will cost us in the trust of Territorians if we allow the lights to go out while sitting on legacy systems that no longer serve their purpose. Madam Speaker, Treasury analysis shows that every year of delay compounds our exposure and undermines future resilience of our electricity generating systems. But Madam Speaker, this is more than electricity. This is about governing for the future and doing what is right. Thinking about the future and our grid is something that the previous government seemed to miss out on. This is about managing risks before they manifest. It's about building systems that are stable, accountable and investment ready. It's about doing the hard work now so that Territorians can rely on a secure, affordable and modern energy future. Madam Speaker, I'm proud of the work that we are doing, and I want to thank all the partners and stakeholders who continue to engage with this process. This, Madam Speaker, is the work that the previous Labor government failed to do and put our electricity system at risk. But Madam Speaker, together we are building a system that is not just fit for purpose, but is fit for the future, and it's fit for the Territory's future, and will de-risk our electricity system and provide that all too needed certainty for Territorians and for proponents looking to come and work with and develop in the Northern Territory. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Gwoja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And of course, when we're talking about energy in the Northern Territory, we're talking about something that certainly affects every Territorian, regardless if you live in Darwin, Palmerston, Katherine, Tennant Creek, Alice, remote communities and in fact homelands, and absolutely acknowledging that the electricity makeup in the Territory is very different. Many of our homelands still operate on hybrid systems, solar power and diesel generation to help them continue to generate power. We've got solar farms across the Territory that are, providing, energy into the grid. We've still got large gas-fired generation in the Northern Territory as well. So when we are talking about energy in the Northern Territory, we are talking about a number of sources of energy which continue to keep the lights on for people right across the Territory. Any reform that absolutely looks to provide certainty for Territorians for their power reliability is a good conversation. It's a good debate to have. Yes, people have many different views on how to get to the objective, which is reliable, cheap, affordable power for Territorians, but it's important to have those conversations. I do just want to note, Madam Speaker, that people have spoken about and people in the community are talking about January 2026. And I just wanted to be clear that households after January 2026 will continue to pay the domestic energy tariff for the customer's first 55 kilowatts of consumption of energy each day, and a higher tariff equivalent to the standard of the commercial tariff after this threshold. Consumption will be calculated each billing period based on the daily energy consumed. So, Madam Speaker, what that means is that there will be an increase in power bills for people in the Northern Territory who have large families, who might have to have a number of air conditioning units on in their home during those extensive extreme heat periods, or if you're from the south like I am in Alice Springs of the Territory, wintertime heating to keep the household warm. If you're in a remote community or a regional setting, you might not have the up-to-date cooling and warming technology, so you might be relying on what people call the box rattlers, which is the old air conditioners in the window, and they draw a lot more power than a split system reverse cycle inverter air conditioning. So, these power changes will have an increase, predominantly probably more likely on vulnerable families who are living below the poverty line already, or if you look at our people who live in the rural areas of the Northern Territory who rely on bore water. If you're having to run your bore pump every day to guarantee that your house has running fresh water for your kitchen, for your shower, for your toilet facilities, that is going to come at a cost, a higher cost to you when this tariff changes. So let's be clear that that's what's happening, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, energy is absolutely important. We do need to have a serious conversation about it. The top end we do see during extreme heat periods, they draw a lot more demand for energy. Central Australia is always the powerhouse of the Territory. We produce more energy than the demand is at the moment. And that has been a huge volume of work that our hard-working public servants have always had to do to look at how we can manage that issue in Central Australia around energy consumption, in feeding in to the grid versus the demand to take out. So I acknowledge that it's a complex issue. But, Madam Speaker, while we are talking about energy, let's be clear here. Today is an important conversation. We are actually debating legislation on energy tomorrow. This morning is an attempt for the CLP government to get ahead and continue to hide the failures of their government when it comes to being open, transparent and accountable with Territorians about what is going on with the INPEX disaster, Madam Speaker. That's what's happening now. You've got the Minister for the Environment, Josh Burgoyne, the member for Breitling, ducking and weaving at every chance he can, refusing to do interviews with media outlets in the Northern Territory because he doesn't want to talk about what's actually going on. He doesn't want to actually come out and absolutely be honest with Territorians.
Take your seat, please, Member for Gwoja. What's your point of order, Member for Goyder?
35, relevance to subject. I'm not getting the dot points in between.
I think it's relevant. I'll let the member continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Full points to the member for Goyder for trying to stand up and defend his government to continue hiding the IMPEX scandal. We are talking about energy. IMPEX is an energy provider. This is a government who are refusing to actually be open and transparent about Territorians. The Minister for the Environment, Josh Burgoyne, needs to actually come out, face Territorians, be truthful, tell Territorians how long have you known about what is going on at IMPEX before it was made public? How long? How long have you sat on your hands and hide and ask people...
Member for Gwoja, take your seat. Minister Burgoyne.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Understanding Order 31, the imputations are that we've known about this previously. It was stated in this Parliament that on Wednesday last week, the 15th...
sorry, take
they're
your seat.
improper
You
imputations,
cannot
Madam
use
Speaker.
Point of order to give a speech or add new information. You can stand up shortly and contribute what you like. Member for Gwoja, sorry, you have the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not implying anything. I am saying right here, right now, that if the Minister was going to be truthful, accountable and open to Territorians, then tell this Parliament today how long have you personally known about what is going on at IMPEX? When did the department brief you? The interjections are just astonishing, trying again as hard as they can to hide. Nothing to see here is what you see from this government. What we want to know is Territorians want to know, how long did the department know? How long did the Minister know? How long did the Cabinet know about what was going on with the issues around IMPEX here in the Northern Territory? These are important questions. We saw in question time this week the Minister, Josh Burgoyne, the Environment Minister, who's supposed to stand up for environmental protection in the Northern Territory, when asked questions by the opposition and crossbench, refused to give a worthwhile, lengthy, appropriate, truthful answer, just gave a quick one-line and sat down, dodging and weaving accountability. This is what we are seeing. The government must be open and transparent about this issue. This is about energy. This is about the environment. This is about integrity. This is what Territorians want to know. Madam Speaker, I went down to Woolies last night and I got bailed up by so many people saying, what is this government hiding? Why don't they want to actually tell us what is going on around the issues surrounding IMPEX? And I said to them, good question. We'd like to know as well. But what we're seeing from this government is a government who are not being open, transparent and accountable, not answering the questions, refusing to do media interviews. I'm sure they'll be jumping next week when they feel like the story's gone away. Well, the story's not going to go away because people out there know that you are hiding something, that the government is hiding something around this IMPEX issue, and you are not being truthful with people. So we can come in here today and talk about energy, absolutely important. I absolutely acknowledge the work that is being done by the public service in energy reform. It's important, it's good. I look forward to having that debate tomorrow. I do think it's cheap, dirty, nasty politics for the CLP to try and create a smokescreen and say, we're going to talk about energy today because we just want people to think that we're doing all the great work and we don't actually want to talk to them about the IMPEX issues. We don't want to actually have to talk about what is going on, how long we knew about it, why we didn't talk about it. That's the answers that people are looking for, is a government to come out and say the truth. What actually happened? I am here saying when it comes to energy, stabilising the grid, the demand pressures, great, good work. Absolutely acknowledge the work that you're doing in this space. Not having a jab at you there, but I am saying to you today, if we're going to actually have a constructive conversation about energy, then step out of this building right now, face the media and answer the questions that they want to know, that Territorians want to know around IMPEX. How long have you known? What are you doing about it? These are the questions that people want to know. They don't want to hear the Deputy Chief Minister talking like he always does. They want to actually know what the CLP government is going to do around this, what the Environment Minister is actually going to do about standing up for the environment and environmental protections, because the people of Alice Springs might not be in Darwin, but the good people of Breitling are watching right now, and they continually see the member for Breitling stripping environmental protections, defunding things, and when he doesn't want to face people, he just simply declines an interview or simply declines an invitation to attend a community event. That's not leadership, but what you see under this government is continued cowardly attempts to cover up the truth.
Member for Berkeley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to support the Deputy Chief Minister's report on the dire strait of the Northern Territory electricity system. And Madam Speaker, I wish to put on the record the grave consequence of a Labor government that for 8 years failed to deliver critical reforms to our electricity system, which was desperately needed. A Labor government that disregarded expert advice from the Utilities Commission on how to prepare the Territory's regulated electricity system for the future. And a Labor government that, instead of taking energy agnostic, lowest cost to the consumer approach, was guided by their ideological drive to reach an unrealistic 50% renewable generation target. The culmination of these failures has left Territorians footing the bill for a power grid prone to blackouts and ill-prepared for future challenges. Madam Speaker, Labor's insistence on pursuing their political agenda led the former government to defer essential operational and investment decisions that did not align with their ideology. Among the most dangerous of these deferred decisions was Labor's failure to finalise a plan to replace Channel Islands' ageing generators as they approached end of life. By way of background, the original life expectancy for Channel Islands C1 to C6 was 30 years, with an original planned retirement in 2012. These already ageing generators, with exception of the C3 unit, had their lifespans extended by 15 years up until 2027, leaving plenty of time for any government to properly plan for their replacement. However, after 8 years under a Labor government that preferred to invest in art galleries and shadeless structures over critical infrastructure, these same ageing gas-fired generators still provide Darwin and Katherine with much of their electricity generation and grid firming capacity. Madam Speaker, the age of these generators elevates the risk of mechanical failure and system trips, increasing the likelihood of blackouts. As Minister for Essential Services, every time there is a blackout, I do my best to ensure power is restored with haste, but I urge Territorians to remember that while Labor promised to deliver an energy future backed by renewables, they have instead left the Territory with ageing critical generation infrastructure that exposes Territorians to more frequent interruptions and outages. Madam Speaker, while I'm on the topic of blackouts, it's not like Labor were left in the dark on the critical nature of replacing the generators at Channel Island. Since as early as 2019, independent reports, including those from the Northern Territory Utilities Commission through the NT Energy Outlook report process, have consistently highlighted the risks and challenges facing our electricity system. In particular, the Utilities Commission stressed the urgent need to plan for the retirement of generation assets at the Channel Island Power Station and to commission alternative generation sources. Yet these warnings were repeatedly ignored by the former Labor government, which failed to take meaningful action to replace this essential capacity. While some may believe it unfair to claim that Labor chose to ignore these warnings, it is clear that this was not the case. I refer to an ABC article from July 2023, which states, Darwin Katherine grid at risk of power blackouts within 3 years, Utilities Commission fines. The then Minister for Essential Services, the now opposition leader, was asked to comment on concerns raised in response to the 2022 Northern Territory Electricity Outlook report findings. The report's findings were very clear, Madam Speaker. Action and investment decisions are needed now to avoid risks to maintaining a secure Darwin Katherine power system as early as 2027. The report explicitly warned that within 4 years, electricity demand may exceed supply if a solution was not found to replace the 185 megawatts of generation capacity scheduled for retirement at Channel Island Power Station. When asked for comment, the now opposition leader stated, and I quote, "The Outlook report necessarily assumes only committed electricity projects." And then she went on to assure Territorians that the NT government is planning for future generation capacity to replace planned retirement of existing gas-fired generators, as well as near-term investments in the essential services required to enable the safe commissioning of future renewable energy projects. Madam Speaker, I asked the opposition leader, well, what happened? Where are these promised near-term projects? The projects expected to take the place of the generators at Channel Island, critical in supplying and stabilising the Darwin-Katherine grid. Was the plan to get all your power from solar farms commissioned without adequate battery storage, leaving Territorians vulnerable to blackouts every time a few clouds passed overhead? Madam Speaker, when the Country Liberal Party came into office in 24, we weren't left with much of value in the electricity space. No strategy, limited committed replacement capacity and scarce investment in the infrastructure needed to secure our energy future. So I asked the opposition leader again, was this just another broken Labor promise? While the Labor Party may not have understood the damage they were doing, the CLP has always understood that energy policy must be grounded in practicality, stability and the delivery of affordable power for Territorians in both the short and long term. Madam Speaker, I guarantee that this government is not repeating Labor's mistakes, and while they may take a while to clean up, we are committed to restoring confidence in our energy system by delivering the power security Territorians deserve at an affordable price. As Minister for Essential Services, I've already taken action to correct Labor's numerous energy mistakes and do my part in steering the Territory back to a stable and affordable energy future. In March of this year, I announced the decision to extend the life of 3 gas generators at the Channel Island Power Station, a critical decision long overdue and long neglected by Labor. I was advised by TGen that extending the life of these generators, 1 to 2031 and 2 to 2035, would likely secure reliable capacity for the 150,000 Territorians who depend on the Darwin-Katherine grid. As mentioned, these generators are ageing and require investment, but with no committed replacement projects planned by the former Labor government, this decision became the government's most viable option, or perhaps its only option if we were to ensure energy security. Madam Speaker, tomorrow, with the support of this chamber, this government intends to pass the Electricity System and Market Operator Bill 2025 and the Electricity Legislation Amendment Market Reform Bill 2025. Among other benefits, these laws will streamline electricity infrastructure procurement and establish a framework for whole-of-system planning, a significant step in avoiding the investment failures that occurred under the previous Labor government. Madam Speaker, our electricity system is in a dire strait and requires immediate reform and investment. With tomorrow's expected passage of the energy market reform bills and across the next 3 years, this government will deliver the reforms and investments needed to rebuild the Territory's electricity grids. Madam Speaker, our actions will ensure Territorians enjoy reliable, affordable power to restoring our economy and rebuilding our unique Territory lifestyle. That is this government's commitment and what we will deliver. Madam Speaker, I support the ministerial report brought on by the Deputy Chief Minister. Thank you.
Member for Drysdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I too rise to commend the Deputy Chief Minister on bringing on this ministerial report, because what I really want to impress upon this House today is the importance of energy. Most of the great issues we face, at the core of it is a question of power and the generation of electricity. Unfortunately, in my electorate, we have quite ageing infrastructure, fragile supply, and we've seen rising costs across the grid. This means in Drysdale we do regularly see blackouts, there's potential load shedding, and maintenance failures that people in the electorate have to endure. That means home businesses like Melissa's, who has an award-winning business in Driver. She works from home, and when there's a blackout in Driver, it means essentially she can't work, she can't meet her time frames, and it impacts her business. We have a lot of people who are at home throughout the day, and so these blackouts do cause big issues across the community. Everything relies on reliable power. It's an easy throwaway, but when you look at our community and how much it does rely on electricity, it shows that this topic needs to be front and centre, both, yes, for the public service and their delivery, but in the political arena. It is an issue I believe we have not performed well at, probably over the last 20 years in this country and the Northern Territory, and it's something we need to rectify because the implications are vast. And as we've seen manufacturing collapse throughout the country, but particularly here in the Northern Territory as well, and power is a major reason behind that. So, and this isn't a new train of thought. So, and I'll just slip this in it'll be very brief, Madam Speaker, but since learning my peer, the opposition leader, is also a lover of Greek mythology, there's just a quick little story in there about the importance of power. So Prometheus went to the mountain and he stole fire and he gave it to humanity. And Zeus was very angry and for eternity has punished him. But why did he punish him? Zeus was angry because when Prometheus gave humanity power, what he actually gave them was the power to be their own gods. And that is what angered Zeus. And that message, I find it's amazing. Thousands of years ago, it was realized that fire, in the giving of power, is what would enable humanity to self-realize and actualize and be freed from the power of the gods. And it holds true today because without power, we don't have flowing water. Hospitals can't heal, schools can't teach, and businesses can't compete. So if we look at just the topic of fresh water comes down to the question of power because we've developed the technology to desalinate. We've developed the technology to pump from aquifers. And so drought no longer is a problem of fate and the weather. Drought is truly a problem of power because with enough power, you can mitigate against drought. And so when we think of some of these larger issues, we need to be thinking of power and its generation at its core. Manufacturing, which is something close to my heart, what we need is cheap, abundant electricity. Because when we look at the input costs of manufacturing, and if we just make it really simple, you've got the cost of labour and the wages, you've got your cost of materials, and then you've got your electricity costs. Now, if we don't want to lower the wages for Territorians, we've got to lower the two others so that we are competitive. Now, the easiest one that we can do is lower electricity by making cheap, reliable power. That, in turn, will lower the cost of getting the materials out of the ground and into the work shed. So if we tackle that one thing, we can actually be competitive in manufacturing whilst maintaining relatively good wages for our labour force. And so, again, manufacturing and the death of manufacturing that we've seen is a question of power and electricity policy. And as we're on the cusp of computing and AI are the most power-hungry industries to a degree we don't even realise yet. As we see some of the new computing power that's coming on board, it is so electricity hungry, but it is the future. It is happening, and we need to be able to feed it. And how we decide now how we're going to ensure we have that edge, because if we don't, other jurisdictions in the country will move on it, and other countries in the world will move on it, and we will be left behind. So we need to ensure that we can maximise this century's greatest leap, which will be computing and AI, that we are on the forefront with cheap, reliable energy. And it also speaks to defence and national security, Madam Speaker. We need strong energy systems here. We need it for our bases. We need it for our radar systems. We need it for communications. And importantly, we need it for our defence industries. We cannot have a grid that our grids need to be reliable, they need to have backups, and this will ensure we can hold national security, which, as we know in the Northern Territory, we are at the forefront of national security for this country. And if we want defence industry to be able to create what our Defence Force needs, especially in a time of war, then we need to ensure that we have cheap, reliable energy with multiple backup systems so that industry can keep providing our forces what they need. We also see a rise in electric vehicles, Madam Speaker, and the modernisation of transport. Again, this is another step forward we are taking, and the technologies will only get better. And so with that, the everyday person's energy demand is only going to skyrocket. When you compound all these things on top of each other, the fact is every Territorian is going to need far more electricity, and that's just going to happen year on year. And so our policy needs to target that, and we need to feed it, and we need to make sure we can do it so that we are best positioned to maximise our gains this century. We have humongous opportunity. We are so blessed in the Northern Territory with the opportunity we have. Between gas and solar, we have the ability to produce huge amounts of electricity, and we can deliver that cheap, reliable energy that Territorians need in every single aspect of their lives. And if you don't think energy is important, you just have to look around your home, look around your workplace. Every single part of your life needs energy, and if we get it cheaper energy that is reliable, we will see a growth in our individual wealth. It will happen. If we can get that cost down, you will see our economic wealth rise. And so we have, Madam Speaker, a huge opportunity that lies ahead of us. It is something our government is extremely aware of. We understand not only the community's need, but the economic need that energy will deliver, and that's why I commend the Deputy Chief Minister in raising this today, because he's drawn a line in the sand. He said, he's saying on record the situation we've inherited, and he's taking the bull by the horns, and he's going to ensure that Northern Territory and its people are best placed to maximise for all our workers, our manufacturers, our hospitals, our schools, and all our computer and industries we don't even have yet. And through energy, we will create and have the potential to create new industries that we don't even have workers yet in, but they will provide that economic benefit into the future. Thank you.
Member for Fannie Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to contribute to the Minister for Mining and Energy's report to the Assembly on the dire state of the NT electricity system. I speak on behalf of every Territorian who has been left behind by the chaos, mismanagement and delusion that defined the former Labor government's energy policy. We all know the truth. Labor promised lower power prices, cleaner energy and reliable supply. Instead, they delivered blackouts, budget blowouts and prices that soar beyond the reach of working families and small businesses. Madam Speaker, as a Territorian, the dire state of our electricity system deeply concerns me, but as the member for Fannie Bay, it alarms me. In Fannie Bay, there's been over 200 outages between 2016 and 2024. 200 outages. When we came into government, the Territory had been left with an electricity system that, quite frankly, could keel over at any second and is significantly costing us in the process. Labor did not put in the necessary plans in place to fix the Territory's old and inefficient energy infrastructure, and they have failed to secure our energy future. Madam Speaker, on the other hand, this CLP government has been proactive when it comes to keeping the lights on for Territorians and dealing with Labor's energy failures. The electricity reform package we'll be debating in Parliament this week is another Labor mess that we're acting on and mopping up. Madam Speaker, the cost to Territorians has been absurd. In the current financial year, the Territory's budget has had to swallow a $51 million increase in our community service obligations, or CSOs as they're commonly known. CSOs are government subsidies that reduce Territorians' energy bills by about 50%. If it wasn't for our government CSOs, households would be paying approximately $1,700 more for their energy bill. For business, it would be approximately $3,900 more. To maintain this level of support, the CLP Whanokēʻaru government's first budget has allocated $192 million so that Territorians don't have to dig so deep into their pockets. Madam Speaker, the savings our government make for Territorians on their energy bills are proportional to the cost of this energy. In other words, the lower the cost to generate energy, the lower the cost passed on to Territorians, and the less our government has to subsidise costs. As a result, there is no doubt that the cost of energy generation and the level of our government has had to subsidise this cost is impacted by our ageing infrastructure. Madam Speaker, most people know I grew up in Alice Springs. The Ron Goodin power station is at the end of its life and cannot be extended anymore. It's an old, unreliable system that has led to chronic blackouts and means our government has had to pick up the slack under Labor's poor plan for our failing electricity system. Madam Speaker, Labor in power from the year 2000 through to the year 2024, with the exception of a small stint between 2012 and 16. That's 20 of the last 25 years, Madam Speaker. And Labor dare to blame this new government for the damage they caused. Shame on them. Another significant reason that our CSO has skyrocketed is due to emergency gas costs. Madam Speaker, the escalation in costs for emergency gas comes from poor planning. With the Beetaloo on our doorstep and gas companies knocking on our door to come take advantage of this gas, the price of gas and the impact of their energy bills should be the least of Territorians' concerns. However, Madam Speaker, bad planning on Labor's part has meant that our government has had to buy emergency gas, outside the cheap gas we should be receiving under our gas supply arrangements. In addition to this, instead of focusing on unlocking the cheap, abundant gas we have here in the Territory, Labor were focused on, well, we're not actually sure what they were focused on. Not sure they were focused on anything. Labor's poor attempt to invest in our electricity system and to right their wrongs led to the bungle investment in solar. The utility farms at Manton Dam, Bachelor and Catherine, built under Labor, sat there for years until our government came into power and finally allowed them to dispatch electricity to the grid. Madam Speaker, Labor may have been aiming for 50% renewables, but instead they only managed to dispatch 15% solar-generated electricity. Our government is not anti-solar and it's not anti-renewables, but we are anti-energy that drives up costs for Territorians and doesn't contribute to improving our failing electricity system. This CLP government is taking an energetic, agnostic approach so that we can use the necessary means, whether that's gas or solar, to keep the lights on for Territorians, with the risk of our CSO and Territorians' bills skyrocketing. Our government can't get Beetaloo online fast enough. And when we do invest in renewables like solar, it'll be part of a well-orchestrated system-wide plan. Madam Speaker, in addition to getting our energy mix right for the Territory and at the right price, this CLP government is delivering an electricity market reform package that will continue to drive down costs for Territorians and for the Territory. Until the CLP came into power, the Territory's energy system was left to its own devices, and Territorians had to pay for this disorganisation ever since. The reforms we're progressing consist of centralising our system control in 𝒕𝒔𝒊𝒄𝒊𝒕𝒚, spinning this unit out of power. Sorry, Madam Speaker, I'll repeat this sentence. The reforms we're progressing consist of centralising our system control in 𝒕𝒔𝒊𝒄𝒊𝒕𝒚, spinning this unit out of Power and Water Corporation and into its own independent body. We're modernising the changing way of our electricity market and how it operates by giving 𝒕𝒔𝒊𝒄𝒊𝒕𝒚 the mandate to implement a coordinated, regulated electricity system investment plan. Madam Speaker, I did attend the briefing that was provided by the Minister, and I can tell you how much of a difference this is going to make in ensuring that the GOCs, or government-owned corporations, stay in their respective lanes. These reforms are going to allow for true competitiveness, providing a level procurement playing field for all the GOCs and private investors to compete for projects that our energy system actually needs. Madam Speaker, a centralised procurement process brings more players to the NT's electricity market, with the ability to provide cheaper capital, lowering our costs and reducing the amount Territorians have to foot the bill for. Madam Speaker, with the dire state of the Territory's electricity system, these reforms have been a long time coming. However, they've been even longer under Labor, which set them back in motion in 2020. Clearly, Labor knew these reforms were important. If they weren't, they wouldn't have started them. However, under Labor, Territorians got inaction for their energy future. And this government is making these reforms a reality and getting on with the job as part of our year of action. Our government knows that over the forward estimates, CSOs will continue to be part of our budget, and it's a price we're willing to pay to keep the electricity prices low for Territorians. Under Labor, the Northern Territory's electricity market became a case study in failure. They shut down efficient gas generation while throwing millions at experimental projects that could never deliver baseload power. They buried industry in regulation. They scared off private investment, and they pushed a reckless agenda that chased headlines rather than delivering results. Households are paying the price. Electricity bills have exploded. Businesses are struggling to stay open, and regional communities who once relied on affordable energy to sustain jobs and opportunity are being left in the dark, literally and figuratively. The legacy of this Labor's grand energy experiment, ideology over practicality, slogans over solutions, and politics above the people they were elected to serve. Madam Speaker, the Territory cannot afford another decade of this neglect, and that's why this government has a clear disciplined plan to restore affordable, reliable, and confidence in the power system. Every dollar wasted on red tape is a dollar stolen from Territory households. So we're putting it back, right at the heart of our energy's future. The Northern Territory has abundant natural resources. Labor chose to leave them in the ground. We will not. We will responsibly harness them to ensure a stable power supply and bring down costs through common sense and competition, and we're restoring trust in the market. We will open the field to innovation, encourage investment, and ensure that every provider competes to deliver the best deal for the consumer, not the bureaucrat. Finally, Madam Speaker, we're giving power back to the people. This government believes that local organisations like councils and regional communities should have the tools to develop their own energy solutions, microgrids, hybrid solutions and small-scale gas developments that deliver real resilience and independence. The difference between us and Labor is simple. We believe in practicality, in enterprise and the ability of Territorians to chart their own future. Labor believed in control, in bureaucracy and enforcing ideology where innovation should have led. Madam Speaker, we would have loved to have come into government and not found that every time we turned around, we found another mess, another empty promise, another underfunded project, another message that had no substance. So our mission is clear, is to clean up their mess. We will rebuild confidence in the system and make the Northern Territory the powerhouse that it should have always been. Madam Speaker, the time for excuses is over. The time for results has arrived, and this government will deliver for Territorians. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Blain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise to speak to this ministerial report on power. But I'd like to just begin my remarks by addressing the comments from the member for Goyder. So we came in here today to talk about the NT's power system in preparation for the bill tomorrow, which I think is one of the, in terms of the overall structure of the Territory, I think it's probably one of the more, after Declan's laws, probably, and our crime reforms and territory coordinator is probably one of the more substantive things that we're going to do in terms of its long-term effects on the territory. So this is very serious. People need, you know, when they turn the lights on, they need the power to come on. People rely on power. So it's a serious topic. And the member for Gwoja comes in here, and instead of playing the ball and dealing with the issue, he plays the man and goes off on a rant about something completely separate, which was dealt with in Parliament yesterday. As a former minister, he should know that sometimes there's things that he can't talk about. He needs to make a public statement and then allow the processes to carry on, but he chooses to play politics, which is a shame. But he does that because he knows that he's got no record to stand on, Madam Speaker. He's the worst Attorney General in NT history who oversaw the burgeoning crime crisis exploding out of control. In his own electorate, more people chose to go out bush onto homelands instead of being forced to vote for that little boy. That's what we're dealing with. Of 6,132 people enrolled, only 1,654 voted for him, 27%. But I move on. The theme of the previous Labor government was announcements with no substance. They loved announcements. I'm sure they watched the ABC comedy Hollow Men, and instead of taking it as a comedy, they took that as a recipe book for how to run a government. Chasing announceables. What are we going to announce today? What can we announce? Don't worry about actually delivering on it. Don't worry about actually, how are we going to pay for it? Don't worry about how much is in the budget. Let's just announce it. Let's announce a clinic for Mackay. Let's announce the road to Wadeye. Let's announce this, let's announce that. How are we going to pay for it? Don't worry about that. Just announce it, put it on the program of works, she'll be right, mate. You know, and then when people come back and say, what's happening with the clinic in Mackay? What's happening with the road to Wadeye? Yeah, we're working on it. Meanwhile, the whole time they knew there was no cash allocated. It was off in fairyland. It was a castle in the sky. The former Labor government loved to make announcements without considering how to actually get it done. They signed up the Bachelor Solar Farm with ENI. They had no plan of how to manage that power. You know, renewable energy is great. We all love renewable energy here. I can't wait to put solar panels on my roof. You know, we use solar down at the farm to pump water. We love renewable energy, but you've got to, the power system has to be matched from millisecond to millisecond, supply and demand. You know, people go to university and study for years to be able to understand all the mathematics of how to manage a power system. You've got to have supply and demand matched second to second perfectly. You can't have, you know, if you've got a solar farm pumping out power and then a cloud goes over, you've got to have something to balance that out. You can't just have, you know, a big chunk of the grid fall over. And so what do? Instead of actually planning, instead of actually dealing with it, instead of commissioning a battery to smooth out the supply, putting in a control system, you know, so that could be managed, what do? They just didn't connect it. So we had a solar farm at Bachelor. I can't speak to the one at Katherine, but I can speak for the one at Bachelor. I drive past it, you know, whenever I go down to visit, you know, people I know in Bachelor, you drive past it. It's all there, those solar panels, diligently turning to face the sky, turning to face the sun. And for what? Nothing. For years and years and years, all that power just being wasted because the previous Labor government could not be organised to actually connect it properly. Yeah, I pick up on the interjection from the opposition leader there, but she knows that she failed too. She was the Minister for Essential Services.
Okay, that's enough. No
Anyway,
interjections. Silence.
I move on. The previous Labor government got drunk and then they blame us for the hangover. It's not, we aren't the ones who got drunk. They had a party for 8 years, spending taxpayers' dollars. Now here we are to clean up the mess. We're the ones dealing with the hangover. Territorians are the ones dealing with the hangover. And then they're blaming us for having a sore head. No. It was the previous Labor government who got drunk, They were the ones who signed us up for things without considering how to actually deal with it. Now here we are to clean up the mess. I'm going to be supporting the bill tomorrow. I'd just like to speak about, in terms of my electorate, why the 𝒍𝒆𝒄𝒊𝒄𝒊𝒕𝒚, which we're going to be talking about tomorrow, is so important. So in my electorate, my suburbs of Malden and Woodruff, and Driver in the member for Drysdale's electorate, power outages have been a huge topic of conversation recently. So the most recent one was on the 20th of October from 7:45 p.m. to approximately 9:30 p.m. So Malden and Woodruff and Driver were affected. There were, the issue was some sort of a problem in the underground power cables. So I just want to take the moment to say thank you to the hard-working lines people in Power and Water who are on call and will come out day or night, rain or shine, and they will do their best and work hard to restore power to Territorians. So they were fantastic. They were, instead of being at home with their family enjoying dinner, they rolled out 7:45 p.m. and they went out there and fixed that power cable. But in the meantime, there were 3 suburbs of people who had mums putting their kids down, bubs, toddlers, who were unable to, kids trying to put. I was here when Jacob was, how old was he? About 18 months old when Cyclone Marcus hit, and all the power went out for days. And trying to put down an 18-month-old when there's no power and no fans and no aircon, no nothing, is hard. So that was 3 suburbs of people who had to suffer in the heat with no fan, no aircon and no warning. On the 15th of October, from about 7:10 p.m. to about 9 p.m, I don't have the exact time when it was resolved, another outage. And before that, there was another outage on Mackay Circuit, and I think that one lasted a bit longer. Our power system is in dire need of attention. After 8 years of neglect, it needs attention. It is essential to take action and create an entity which will be wholly and solely focused on running the grid and undertaking the investment required. So thank you, Madam Speaker.